Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. We're going to talk about the insurance crisis. Why are people, including Assemblywoman Bauer-Kahan, losing homeowners insurance? I am joined by Danielle Cagan, who is with CSAA Insurance in California. Danielle, can you please introduce yourself, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jared, for having me. My name, again, Danielle Cagan. I work at CSAA Insurance Group. We provide AAA insurance to AAA members in 23 states, plus the District of Columbia. And we write about $7 billion worth of insurance each year and are headquartered actually in the beautiful East Bay in Walnut Creek. We are in an insurance crisis here in California, and many of the listeners of this podcast are feeling the impacts of that, whether it's being non-renewed by their insurance company, whether they are moving and buying a new house and unable to find insurance because many of the carriers have pulled out of the state, or they're keeping their insurance, but they're seeing their premiums increase. The market is definitely in a crisis. It's not sustainable and it needs to be addressed. Many insurance companies have backed out of the state, and they've done it because, frankly, they aren't being profitable. And I can talk a little bit about what that looks like and what drew us to that point. But with fewer companies offering insurance, it's just harder to get it, harder to secure it, harder to keep it. At CSAA, we continue to write new business in California. We're one of the few large insurers that are continuing to do that. We are also, in some areas, doing a small number of non-renewals, particularly small compared to other insurance companies. But those that we are non-renewing, we're working to do it with care and compassion. And we are offering to rescind the renewal if the insurer, if the homeowner makes changes to their homes and works to reduce their risk and receives a certification of a wildfire prepared home. We are encouraging people to become wildfire prepared home, get a certification, and then we will rescind their non-renewal. And if they don't get it done in time for their policy, if they go somewhere else, we will still take them back. For example, if they end up needing to go to the FAIR plan, they can receive the certification within a year and we will take them back, which is obviously what we want to do in the first place. But it's an opportunity for people to have some control over their destiny as well and help mitigate their homes.
The insurance crisis in California that's born mostly out of the large extent we've had a lot of large scale fires, correct?
I wish it was just that, because then we would stop the fires and we would be able to fix everything quickly. And unfortunately, it's just so much more complicated. If you'll bear with me, I'd like to give you like a rundown of all of
Let's
the
do it.
factors that are like. The first is the regulatory. All price increases and policies are offered by, or they're reviewed and approved by the California Department of Insurance. And it's a challenging, rigorous process that was set forth by Prop 103, which was passed in 88 by 51% of the voters. And it set forth some really challenging regulatory things. It didn't necessarily reflect what future was going to be. It's fairly dated. It requires insurance companies to do a number of things. There are interveners, this process where people will intervene on behalf of the public, and those are people that the insurance company pays for to fight against the rate approvals, and it can delay them. Further, the California Department of Insurance also had a pause for a number of years around the pandemic, where they got backlogged, which made it even harder to do the rate increases. And they have rules in place as well that the way you look at, like California Department of Insurance, when they review these rates, they're trying to figure out what is appropriate and what is fair to the consumer. And the Proposition 103 defines that as looking at the last 20 years of what insurance companies paid and what the risk was. Things are changing right now. And so you look between now and looking back 20 years and now and looking forward 20 years, the risks are changing. That's a problem when you can't charge that adequate rate. I would say inflation just like many consumers. So in addition to the regulatory environment, we got inflation. And just like everybody goes to the grocery store, goes shopping, is feeling the impact of inflation, that is even more dramatic on construction costs and construction labor. And so those are going up much faster than the rate of inflation globally and in California. Keeping up with that is a challenge. Climate change, I mentioned before. And yes, wildfires are part of it, but it's not just wildfires. In California, you might remember, Jared, I think it was earlier this year, maybe the year before, atmospheric rivers, where it felt like it was raining every day for a month and it was windy and it was atmospheric river after atmospheric river. People don't realize that, particularly when it's rain combined with wind, that results in trees falling to houses and onto cars and fences blowing down. We even had a lot of roof collapses in Tahoe where they were getting a lot of snow. Just those atmospheric rivers and the frequency and severity of those, and particularly when they're consecutive, is having an impact on insurance. I have two more. One is an all other category, but one more, which is reinsurance. And I'm going to geek out a little bit here. Bear with me. Insurance, most people don't realize this, but insurance companies buy insurance too. I like to compare, it's called reinsurance. And it's similar to if you have a homeowner's policy or renter's policy or auto policy, you usually have a deductible. And that's what you, as the policy owner, will pay. And then beyond that, insurance kicks in. Similarly, for reinsurance, and I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but it gives you a sense of what reinsurance is. For us, we retain maybe 100 million or 200 million or 250 million. And beyond that, reinsurers kick in. So that enables us to be able to stay solvent, to have the ability to pay out claims that are due to people in the event of major catastrophes. As you've been having these other factors happening, including climate changes, reinsurers are getting a little questioning, like, what's the right rates? And their rates are going up. And they're looking at it from a global perspective. Even a wildfire in other part of the world might affect reinsurance costs of insurers in the US. And the kicker on this is, I mentioned the regulatory framework earlier. Insurance companies are not allowed in the pricing framework to factor in the rising cost of reinsurance. You have this thing where your rates are frozen, yet you are seeing increased rates, increased climate change, increased reinsurance, and it's just really hard to get profitable. And that's why folks are leaving. There are a few other factors that come into play that I'll add. One is properly maintaining forests. We're building more and more homes in wildland prone or wildfire prone areas. So we're approaching into those areas. We've got aging power infrastructure. So PG&E is working on updating that now, but you've had a lot of fires start from the aging infrastructure. And even something as simple as outdated or not, or systems that aren't as effective as they could be for evacuating in the event of a fire, so much better than we were in 2017, 2018. But if you aren't able to evacuate people, the first thing firefighters and other first responders do is they focus on evacuation and life safety versus fighting the fire. If you have good systems in place that people are evacuating, that enables the fire fighters to focus on working to stop the fires. There's a lot there. It's really rich. So thank you for indulging me and geeking out a little bit. But if I wish it was just like one thing and we could say, we just are going to turn this dial and it's going to fix everything. But it's much more complicated than that.
Well, you're doing a good job of painting a picture of some of the bigger problems we have in the way California is structured, right? A ballot initiative that is more than 40 years old. We talk about land use issues that need to change, that were designed pre-COVID as
Yes.
being outdated. We're talking about things that were before you still had to pay for long distance phone calls and you had pay phones and before the internet.
Absolutely.
Life has changed. The world has changed and you are combining more risk, higher inflation, the resellers issues. And then you have advocates who are saying homeowners can only afford this, or you're impacting disenfranchised communities. But the
Yeah.
places that the companies, and I know State Farm was behind a lot of cuts in particular, was it has to do with fire risk more than they're just cutting everybody, right? It's
Yeah.
that risk portfolio, right?
Yeah. If insurance companies able to make a profit in California, I can virtually guarantee you they wouldn't be leaving.
When you talk about that broader picture, you talk about wildfires around the world, Florida and Texas, just because I like to make fun of those states politically, they're also having insurance crises
Oh, yeah.
because of hurricanes and everything else. And some companies won't
Mhm.
insure that. So California, at least bringing the conversation together, where in those states, they keep ignoring it.
You're absolutely right that it's not just California. Florida had a head start on a lot of these issues because of repeated hurricanes that had happened. But you're seeing Texas, you're seeing even in the Midwest, they're struggling in some areas, other parts of the South. It's no longer just a couple states. It is a broad crisis that a lot of people are taking note of because insurance is we talk about it being like a financial first responder. In the middle of a crisis, you have the fire departments coming in, law enforcement, they're fixing it. But then, in order for communities to rebuild, they need the capital. And that's what insurance companies provide the capital to be able to rebuild and recover from those disasters. And if you don't have a solid market, there are significant challenges with communities being able to rebuild after crises.
You did a good job of framing the problem that California is doing today in the fall of 2024 to help improve the situation.
Oh, there are a variety of things. One is the California Department of Insurance. And actually, I would say after the gloom and doom, I would share that I'm a bit of an optimist in this space, that I think
Okay.
we're taking good steps and it'll just take some time. And there's more work to do, but I would say the California Department of Insurance has a sustainable insurance strategy that they're working through and taking some steps in the right direction, like allowing insurance companies to factor in forecasts for the future. So it's not just backward looking to enable them to look at reinsurance costs as part of rate making, to accelerate and expedite rate reviews and approvals. Because you also need to get permission to decrease your rates. So it's not just for increasing, even for decreasing. Those are all things that the California Department of Insurance is looking at. There's also some legislation, so some policies that the governor and legislature are looking at. And there are things that individual homeowners can do and communities can do. For example, there are organizations called Firewise Communities and Fire Safe Councils. And it's bands of neighborhoods pulling together and talking about how to support the resilience of their own community and invest and talk about the things that need to be done. Then there's what you can do with your individual home. There's the community perspective and the home perspective. And so we were one of the first, CSAA was one of the first to offer discounts for communities that become Firewise communities that are certified. So we have an automatic discount for people that do that communities that have done that. And then we also have discounts for homeowners that do home mitigation. And we have some discounts that are in place now. We have other ones that are filed that we're waiting to get approved. But the gist of it is really just making sure that you're doing everything you can to reduce your risks at your home.
Let's start there on the community side.
Mhm.
Define what is a Firewise community and what are some of those things
Mhm.
communities can do?
There's a organization called the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA is the name of the organization. They certify Firewise communities. There's, a website you can go to. You can look at how to become a Firewise community. There's a commitment that you will have a certain number of meetings, that you will invest a certain amount of time and resources into building resilience for that community. And they certify you as having achieved that. And so we recognize that as an insurance company, believe it helps mitigate risk. Firewise communities, they're growing tremendously in parts of the Bay Area and California right now as more people are focused on the risk.
And as a community, is that citywide? Is it an HOA? Is it a neighborhood coming
It's
together
neighborhoods.
unofficially?
It's neighborhoods usually, because even in a city, you can look at a city, any city, there are parts of it that may be up against wildland urban interface and will be higher wildfire risk and others that will be much lower wildfire risk. It's usually it's neighborhoods that have higher risk.
Not every neighborhood should necessarily focus on the community driven thing unless it's in what is a perceived fire risk area.
I would say you never know. Like we, in the 2017 wildfires up in Sonoma County, there was an area that people thought had no wildfire risk according to the models.
Okay.
And that neighborhood was Coffee Park. We're still learning a lot. We've learned a lot since then. But I would say it's smart to become informed and to learn more about what what you could do as a community, and just as important, what you can do in your individual home. And to the individual home side, we are members of an organization called the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, IBHS. That organization will actually test houses. They build them in this enclosed facility. They build mini houses and they will put this vegetation around it, or that vegetation, or this fence, or that roof, and this siding and that siding, and they will test it to see how resistant it is to wildfire. They actually will simulate embers and they will test and be able to use science to understand what drives wildfire impact. We've gotten a lot smarter as an industry on this, and it's due to the great work of, in fact, a couple weekends ago, I was at an event just across the bridge over in the North Bay. They have an annual event called Ember Stomp, and it's all focused on wildfire preparedness with lots of vendors there talking about what you can do. And IBHS was there, and they had two little buildings and they burned them. They simulated embers. They had little torches and they lit little fires as if it was an ember landing in the yard and or against the house. And the one house just faded away. The fire burned out and it was fine. Like it never really even affected the house. The other one got fully involved and was at the end, like there was, you wouldn't even recognize that it was a building because it didn't use these standards. And we had some people come by our booth afterwards just to say, how do I get certified? I really want to do these things, because before my insurance company was telling me, now I've seen why. I've seen visually why it's important to not have a wood fence leading up to my house. We've seen it, particularly in Colorado. There was a wildfire, and the wood fences going from house to house basically were a wick drawing fire to the house. One of the houses that burned, it had typical mulch around it, like wood chips. And that's like having matchsticks next to your house, right? So if embers come, they hit your house and they fall. If they land on concrete or stone, the fire goes out. If they land on a flammable plant or they land on mulch that's combustible, it's just going to accelerate. And that's exactly what happened in the demonstration. The IBHS has some great standards that you can check out on wildfirepreparedhome.org. And they have a base certification and a plus certification. And for our insureds who achieve any of the certifications, we are now rescinding any non renewals if they do that. It involves a Class A roof, which overwhelming majority of people in California have. So I don't know the exact 97, 98, like a huge percent of people have Class A roofs. And it's 0 to 5 foot defensible space or non-combustible zone around your house, meaning no plants that are gonna catch fire, no mulch, no fencing, wood fencing. And there's some beautiful options out there. But as we talk to our policyholders, one of the things that's the most challenging for them is just visualizing what a house looks like when you have 5 foot around it without shrubbery and plants. Because normally the way we build, we start, we put trees next to houses and we put high growing plants. And then as you move out, it gets lower, where we need to change that. So closer to the house is fewer plants. And then as you go out is where the trees are. We heard enough from our policyholders say, we don't know that we can not have our hedges or that bush or whatever it is that grandma gave us 20 years ago and that type of things. We actually reached out in partnership with IBHS to UC Berkeley. They have a landscape design program, and we invited them to join us in this effort to show people how beautiful this defensible space can look. We actually funded a contest with them and had firefighters and landscape designers judge and gave away thousands of dollars worth of prizes to the landscape design classes. Those designs are available online at the wildfirepreparedhome.org. People can look it up. There's actually blueprints. People can see, they can use them, but very popular way to help dispel some of the myths.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. One really cool job to the people who get to light things on fire for training. If you're into that as a job, better than just doing it in the forest. One that's interesting because I know I'm on a fairly busy pedestrian cross street, and I love the trees in front of our front downstairs windows because you can see in the fall without,
Yeah.
or the winter without the leaves. You could see in through the windows. It would take some thought to how to redo the front in a way that would move those a little bit, a little closer to the road, a little further from the house.
Yeah.
I did take in your suggestion after you had talked to me about the mulch because when I put all new mulch out in black wood chips to make everything look nice, I would not put it right next to the house. I actually left the 2 feet of space. Now I didn't move plants per se because I guess they're just every plant would probably be flammable. But I did
I'll tell
not do
you.
that mulch.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to hear that you didn't do the mulch. And yeah, we're saying zero, the 0 to 5 foot. And I've had people say, can it be 4 feet? Can it be, does it have to be five? And again, going back to science, IBHS actually tested it. And they said 5 foot is what really makes a difference. And it doesn't mean you have to get rid of the trees. They just need to be clear the 5 foot away from the house. In some instances, it just means trimming some branches. There's different ways to look at it. I would say one of the things that we heard from the landscape design folks was when they were first told the 0 to 5 foot, they were like, okay, it was just so different than what they've been taught. And when they came out of it, they shared with us that it looks totally different to them now. That when they look at houses now with plants right next to it, the plants look crowded and they don't have the open space to be able to look as vibrant. It's a different way of looking. It's a culture shift.
My wife wants to redo our front yard in the next year. So if you can give me somebody's phone number to go through that design, we'll appreciate it.
Will do. We'll send you those designs.
I want to come back to other ways that can prevent some of these fires and some of these
Mhm.
risks. How is technology helping to aid the situation?
Great question. We've been looking at a variety of innovative ways to not just respond to AAA members after their homes burn or they have a claim, but working to prevent it. And for that reason, we've done a number of innovative things. One of them is we hosted in partnership with on a global consulting firm and IDEO, which is a firm in the South Bay that does creative design and things. And we together, we sponsored a climate resiliency challenge. And we went out globally and invited people to share ideas, technology, different things that they just needed some visibility and some money to be able to scale. Some were early stage, some were mid stage, and some were looking to scale. We had 17 winners and awarded about $1 million between all of the sponsors of this contest so that we could help support the technology. Not all of them were technology based, but some of them were. One of my favorites is a company called BurnBot, and it's this device that can do controlled burns. I don't know, get notices saying they're doing a controlled burn in a particular neighborhood. This is actually, I would call it like a Zamboni almost, that can go and it incinerates as it goes. The device can actually get into hard to hit areas, might be like around infrastructure, roads, power lines, where you can't just set a fire and let it burn, but can really help with that. It's BurnBot. It's a Bay Area company. It's just an example of one of the technologies that is part of the climate resiliency movement.
And I've seen a company that Wi-Fi enabled like sensors. So if there's a report of a fire in the area, they could douse the outside of
Mhm.
your home with
Yep.
water, or is that good? Are there discounts for that? Is that worth the price?
Um, I know it is a bit pricey. We don't currently offer discounts for that. There are a number of, and I can't speak about any one company, whatever, but I do know that there have been some concerns around the availability of water in a catastrophe, or winds. Oftentimes in a wildfire, you have a lot of wind events. The actual item, where does it spray? Can't really speak to the specific technology, but those are some of the questions that have been raised. And we don't currently offer discounts, and I don't know if they've been tested by IBHS.
Well, I think there's some places where some of the reasons they've had trouble putting out fires is the water supply. To your point, gets maybe the
Yeah.
pipes get burned and they don't have the access to the water or drought.
Right, right. Or the fire service is using the water. They're tapping into the systems. But it depends. I would just encourage people who are considering that to do a full investigation and make sure that you understand the technology, how it works, and what the dependencies might be, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether all of those types of things.
What about in firefighting, right? Are they deploying new technology in terms of using drones, early detection warning systems? Any thoughts there?
Not as much on the technology side. I would say that my understanding is we're getting better on the communication side, which has some technology in having people understand when they're going to be evacuated. There's a app now that many people look at that you can see what the status is of evacuation. I think it's called, I can tell you because I look at it for fires, Watch Duty. And it's a nonprofit organization that has an app so people can get the latest information without having to troll social media and figure out what's correct and what isn't. Watch Duty is a great example there. One significant thing, and a couple things. I think our firefighters who truly heroes in this space and protecting life and property, and in some instances, putting their own lives at risk. They have continued to evolve. The state is invested in more aircraft. The state is invested in more response units. I don't know necessarily about drones. I haven't heard that. It's possible. But I know that they've been purchasing additional aircraft to be able to put out fires. Another thing that they're doing, when we hear these red flag alerts, in the past, if there was a fire, you would have to wait we've got a really good mutual aid system. If one area is on fire, others can be called up to
Right.
and deployed to that area. But there's wait time. You don't just get from Southern California to Northern California in a blink of an eye. And what the state has done is they've changed CAL FIRE. They've pre-deploy fire emergency response teams when there are red flag alerts, that they're closer and they can, sometimes it's not the technology, it's just a matter of using what you've got. They've done a really great job with some of the pre-deployments that has helped in the response.
It, that's just smart planning.
Mhm.
And you can also, I think the key in there is mutual response, right? That's come up with some city
Mhm.
managers before, just talking about police,
Mhm.
right? Criminals don't stop
Mhm.
at a city border, fires don't stop. And
Yeah,
California has a great system of mutual aid where firefighters can get called from many local jurisdictions and be brought to the forests to prevent, the
exactly.
spread.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that about fires not stopping at jurisdictional by areas. They don't say, "Oh, we're crossing into Concord now, we're gonna stop." Instead, they follow wildfire sheds or fire sheds. One of the things that we've been looking to do is to help educate communities about that. Sometimes best investment in reducing your fire risk is in reducing the fire risk of your neighboring community. And that's just not an easy thing to really support necessarily. We're taking your tax dollars and investing in a neighboring community.
Mhm.
But that's what Marin did. They passed a ballot measure many years ago called Measure C. And basically the county residents decided to tax themselves to create a wildfire protection agency that does grants for home mitigation and does inspections and puts on this Ember Stomp event that I mentioned. It's a wonderful way of looking at it beyond jurisdictions. Similarly, in the East Bay, governments are coming together and doing a memorandum of understanding to support a regional approach to wildfire preparedness. And so at CSAA, we are pleased to support that to help them with the startup costs and give them some dollars to support those early discussions to create that memorandum of understanding so that they could think more and act regionally, which I think can have a great impact.
Two other questions come up. Uh, One, there's this concept of raking the forest, controlled burns, cleaning out the debris. Any education around that you could instill upon us? Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Historically, wildfire is a natural part of our ecosystem, and forests need fire. And it's an important part of regenerating and getting rid of some of the low lying fuels in forests. What's happened, however, is as people have started moving into or near forested lands, we've suppressed that fire, that natural fire that happens. And so what happened is that our forests have become overgrown with some of the underbrush, which are often called ladder fuels that will burn and they will get up into the canopy and move super fast. There's an effort to make sure to work to reduce some of this excess biomass in the forests and treat it so that you can manage the fires better when it happens. And the state and federal government have been investing significantly in doing some catch-up work in managing the forests. We've also been looking at it pretty creatively as well. There's an organization called Blue Forest. They have a bond that they created called a Forest Resilience Bond that we've invested in twice. I think we're the only insurance company, and we're definitely the first private company to participate. We invest, and then the proceeds that come back from the downstream efforts of forest management, we get paid back as part of our investment in that. We've been really excited to work with Blue Forest on that. And so much so that we came back to them and said, we're hearing about all these slash piles in the forest. When the forests are managed, you get these mounds of debris that are left in the forest. They're left there either to decay, which continues to add carbon emissions to the environment, and it can also burn when a forest fire comes through. And we really wanted to make sure that was used for the most beneficial uses possible. We asked them about creating a new fund, a wildfire innovation fund, which they did. And it's a $50 million fund. We invested the first $25 million in that. And the state called iBank has their own investment arm, and they just invested 25 million in it. I think it was announced in the last week or so. We're really excited to have that fully funded. And they started investing in projects, and the goals are the triple bottom line. It's creating jobs in rural communities. It's forest health. It is good for the planet. Just all the good things that you want out of investments and projects.
Danielle has given us a lot of ideas and talked about organizations. We will put those in the description of today's episodes, people who really want to learn more. Is there any other question that I haven't asked that you want to touch on, or anything you want to leave homeowners and policy owners with to head out?
I would leave folks with we want to be at CSAA Insurance Group. We want to be part of the solution. We are working to support home mitigation and educate the public on the things that they can do because none of us are powerless in this. If we can take steps to mitigate our homes and don't wait necessarily until an insurance company is reaching out to you about it. As you're doing renovations, as you're re-landscaping, as you're looking at these other things, factor into it wildfire resilience. It's just a smart thing to do. And down the road, it may help you with your insurance premiums. It may help you with securing and keeping your insurance as well.
I appreciate it. Danielle Cagan from A Insurance. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jared, for having me.